Hello, and welcome to my statistical research report. My name is Romteen, and I will be your host this evening to talk about jobs. To be specific, we will be looking at the relationship between our independent variable, the CPI of groceries, and the dependent variables of average wage between males and females. We will be looking at this data in months starting in January 2020 and ending in December 2022. Why is this topic important? Studying this subject is important because citizens deal with inflation on a daily basis, which is a very real and continuous battle faced by citizens. Paying employees enough to live comfortably while keeping up with inflation is a crucial responsibility for businesses and employers. This research will be crucial to grocery store businesses as they need not only to keep up with inflation, but also issue prices that can be both bought by citizens and earn revenue for those businesses. As citizens, we want to be able to buy necessities at a reasonable price so we can live comfortably. While as businesses, we want to be able to make enough revenue and keep up with the ever-increasing inflation rates. First, let's examine the difference in wages between males and females. When looking at the male average wage, both the mean and median point towards an average of approximately $33 per hour, while for females, the mean and median point towards an average of $29 per hour. We can infer that the average hourly wage between males and females differs by approximately $4 an hour. Let's take a closer look at the wage difference between males and females. Here, we can see the histogram chart for the average hourly wage over 2020 to 2022. Here we can see that for males, the average seemed to be between $31.67 per hour and $32.50 per hour, with most of the data falling between $31.67 per hour and $34.17 per hour. In this next slide, we can see the histogram chart for the average hourly wage for females. Compared to the male histogram chart, most of the data falls only on one bar, $28.33 per hour to $30 per hour. This means that compared to the male histogram chart, which is more diverse, the female histogram tells us that the average hourly wage is more rigid and doesn't fluctuate much. This data also ties back to the mean of the genders, where there was a $4 discrepancy, and we can see firsthand that the male hourly wage and the female hourly wage differ by $4 or higher. To emphasize this discrepancy, we can take a closer look at the box and whisker plots for both genders and compare them on the same graph. As we can see in this graph, it is just a repeat of what we have seen in the previous charts. This just proves that what we are talking about is relevant. Like the fact we can see from this graph that the median for both genders proves that there's a $4 difference. When talking about validity, my graph does not carry any outliers and accurately portrays the wages. Another interesting difference that is very clearly visible is that the box and whiskers for both males and females do not overlap. Keep this in mind when talking about the affordability of goods, such as groceries, and who is more likely to buy them. In our final slide, for the wage difference, we can see the standard deviation portrayed in the data for the two genders. For males, it shows a standard deviation of approximately $1.05 per hour, while for females, it shows a standard deviation of approximately 82 cents per hour. This is accurate when comparing to the previous graphs we've seen for both genders. The male average wages are more diverse and deviate more from the lowest to the highest, while the female average wages are less diverse and deviate less than the rest. Let's finally talk about what we came here for, the relationship between the CPI of groceries and the average wage for each gender. As we can see from the graph, the CPI of groceries has gradually increased between 2020 and 2022. We can see that the average wages for each gender also seem to be slanted upward, telling us that the wages do somewhat increase as the CPI increases. We can also see that most of the data seems to cluster near the 150 to 155 mark. This is due to the fact that CPI did not vary much and stayed within the 150 zone before it started to skyrocket due to inflation. A key factor as to why CPI increased so much could be based on when Russia started to invade Ukraine, but take my words with a grain of salt. To further our understanding of the relationship between the CPI of groceries and wages, we can take a look at the correlation coefficient between them. We can see that for males, the data has a strong positive correlation, and the same true for females. But the female correlation coefficient is still lower than for males, which can insinuate that the male population of Canada has a better track record with keeping up with inflation than females. Now, let's be honest and talk about how valid the data I have presented to you today is. Something that could have skewed my data was that the reference period was relatively short and only captured a 2-year time frame, and it does not accurately represent the increase in CPI and the average wages over the past years and in the current years. My data is also not accurate for every person. Some people may have wealthier jobs than others, and that could have skewed the average wage. This data is also limited to Canada and isn't affected by other countries. This doesn't account for the average wages of other wealthy countries like the USA and China. My data also doesn't have a specific age group it accounts for. Some of the earlier ages could only be working minimum wage or lower jobs, while people who are in seniors usually have a stable job that get them a good pay in comparison. And lastly, here are the sources I used. And that will conclude my presentation on the CPI of groceries versus the average wages of males and females. I hope this presentation was educational and informative. Thank you for watching.